Without further ado, we are going to welcome all the way from San Diego, Arek Kaczmarek. He is the Executive Director of Data Engineering and Operations at Providence St. Joseph Health Systems. So let's give it up for Arek.
Thank you. Good morning. So the talk is based on what I've experienced, not just at Providence St. Joseph Health, but it's also it kind of dates back to some of the other companies that I've been with. But it's all based on experience. So I welcome any questions you have. If you have any. The other thing is I wasn't sure how technical to keep the talk. So if you have more technical questions, I'm more than happy to try and answer them. This is technical, but I don't think it's too technical. You'll see probably only one diagram, and so yeah, I don't think there's anything to be scared of. A little bit about my background. So prior to Providence St. Joseph Health, I was with a company called Verimatrix. It's a startup in San Diego, and we were basically building analytic products for videos, video streams that would embed kind of very all the way back on the back end at different video providers. You will probably never heard of them because they support those products. That is, they support the providers. They're not exposed to customers. Prior to that, I was at PlayStation. I was doing a lot of data on gaming and things like that. The New York Times here in New York, Intel, Expedia, and Amazon. So I've got a few different industries behind the belt. And the healthcare industry is very new to me. I just started there about a year ago, and I'm kind of still learning, but it's something that's very interesting. And by the way, I was just explaining to Miriam that the way I got into this industry is, there's a ton of different startups, different companies in Southern California that do healthcare or biomed. And in a lot of different workshops or different presentations that I went to or led also, I had a lot of people in the audience, just like yourselves, where they were asking me questions about healthcare, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And so that's kind of one thing led to another, and I found myself at working for a healthcare company. In any case, all right, let's get started then. The agenda. I have the clicker here. All right, so I'll tell you what the problem statement is. But then, the 3 data concerns of today's enterprise, I'll try to kind of discuss that. Solving for the concerns, architecture areas, I'll show you that diagram. I promise it's very simple. And then organizational focus changes that most likely will be engendered by going to the cloud. And then Q&A. All right, so the data problem today for an enterprise. A lot of companies still have a lot of on-premise hardware, so they have to if they want to start running some application or they want to purchase some new software, they have to buy hardware. They have to set it up. They have to set up not only servers but networking. And I'm not sure how many of you have done this in the past, but it's pretty painful, especially when you have to go through finance and you have to get all the approvals. You have to go through your the different teams that you work with. So it's not just your infrastructure team, but it's also your networking team. And there's basically maybe within infrastructure there are different teams as well. So there's a lot of different steps you have to go through to actually get to that to running those that hardware on-prem. And then provisioning operational overhead is another issue that I'm sure some of you have run into. And by the way, I'm not sure how many of you have done Hadoop, but Hadoop is the really painful thing that no one had any idea how to run. And so when you went to your infrastructure team and you said, well, I need these kinds of servers and I need to open these kinds of ports, they will ask you, well, just give me the ports. Like, well, you want all the 1,000 ports or 2,000 ports that Hadoop uses, and they were just like, well, is that true? Or give me all the sudo commands that you want to run, and that's another thing that they will ask you. So it's it's definitely an issue. It was the thing to do. I don't know how many of you are still doing it, but again, it was definitely a pain point. And then the other one is a lot of you here probably have different teams and you focus on data. I mean, this is a data conference, so my guess is that you focus on data as opposed to running hardware or any of the infrastructure yourselves. And so this is not your competency, most likely. And if it is yours, it may not be your team's. So that's another issue. Then there's cost also. You have to figure out what the cost is. If your company is focusing on capital, for example, capex versus opex, that's all great, and most likely they will. But then you have to figure out also is this really what you want to do for the next 5 years when the next refresh cycle comes in? You're buying those perpetual licenses, for example. And again, I'm not some of you may be vendors. I'm not knocking that down in any way. We all have them and we all need them. At the same time, there's a cost associated with that, and that is that you operate it basically kind of forever or as long as you can. The other problem is scalability, and I think this probably is pertinent to everyone. You basically are bound by your data center, and very often maybe even a rack or two, because there's no more room. I remember when I was setting up Hadoop, for instance, at PlayStation. We purchased a lot of nodes, and it was great. But then we've outgrown them, and so we had to go to we basically had to ask for more space. Well, we got the space within the data center, but we ran out of the space at the data center. So then what do we do? Do we go to another data center? I mean, it's kind of and it takes time. So do we want to invest in that? That's a question. And finally, it's the user friendliness and self-service. Whenever you do data, there's always maybe it's only for your team or your kind of proximity teams. But a lot of times you're going to work with users, a lot of the enterprise as well, or a lot of your around your company. And so you will have to provide some kind of self-service. I'm not saying that it's difficult, but providing self-service is something that you have to definitely think about. Okay, so where we're going, we don't need roads, and it's kind of a funny thing. I just had this. It's not an epiphany in any way, but when I was talking about some of this stuff in the past, for some reason this picture kind of resonated with this. When going to the clouds, I don't know if you remember the movie Back to the Future. Doc comes back and he's like, well, Marty and Jennifer, get in. There's something about you in the future that we need to resolve. And Marty says, well, Doc, don't you need more you need to back up, you need more road. And he's like, oh, don't worry, where we're going, you don't need roads. So it's kind of I think it's very similar to where we're going or what we're trying to do. So you don't need that long runway anymore. You basically, if you're going to the cloud, really you don't need to back up all that much. You can just kind of jump in, but it's very different in the clouds. And I put it in the clouds because there are different cloud providers. I don't want to say that there's only one. There's at least 3 that I can think of. So you pick one. If you want to explore that. And Back to the Future, been there with Hadoop, for example, and data lakes. But now it's in the cloud. If you're building your data lake, it sounds similar. It sounds familiar, but you're building it in a different way and hopefully faster, and you're getting your ROI much faster also. And different roadways for healthcare. There are, and I will hesitate the statement, but in healthcare, I think everyone is a little skittish about going to the cloud, and I can say that from my own experience. For example, we're doing a ton of stuff. We want to be more progressive and want to get there, with the rest of the tech. But there's a lot of skittishness about going to the cloud, about exposing the data, being exposed to all the HIPAA compliance issues and penalties, and I'll show you later what those are too. Okay, so why go to the cloud? So productivity. So for PaaS and SaaS, you can just use your machine learning and AI services in the cloud that the cloud providers already provided for you. You basically, maybe I'm trivializing, but you almost just sign in, sign up, and start using them. I mean, it can be as simple as that. And again, I'm not here to endorse any vendors or any particular technology, so I can't speak to that. But I assure you, there are things that you can use right away, immediately. So you get a lot of productivity out of it right away. Efficiency, there's efficiency associated with that. Again, if you do your ROI and see how the productivity leads into efficiency, you can see that it's all there, and we'll touch on that a little more. Scale, again, it's if you're querying, you're cleansing your data. Let's say you're doing some data engineering initially before you get to your model, or even when you're training your model, you need a ton of data. So you're trying to run it on the lake, your data lake, for example, and suddenly you need more horsepower. I mean, your model has been running for, I don't know, for a day. You don't want to wait there anymore. So you need a lot more horsepower. Well, it's just a click of a button and you get more. So there's a definite benefit of doing it there and doing it with the PaaS offerings or even SaaS offerings. And by the way, PaaS is platform as a service. SaaS is software as a service. Sorry, this is just second nature, I guess. Cost, again, you will figure out your cost also very quickly. But there's again, when you're putting something on-prem, you have to do you kind of want to forecast. I don't know, for me 5 years from now, and what this is going to look like. It's a slightly different mindset, I guess. Here, I'm not saying that you won't be projecting any cost, obviously, because finance will always ask you for that. But you will definitely do it in a different way, and there's going to be a significant ramp down. The only thing to keep in mind is that capex versus opex. Again, a lot of companies prefer that for tax purposes, and so you will have to basically talk to your finance team, how they will work with you on increasing your OPEX spend, because that's going to be that's something that you will be doing a lot more and categorizing it as OPEX as opposed to CAPEX. So they need to be most likely aware of that. Okay, so the 3 areas of concern when going to the clouds. Security. That's a big one, and that's a really big one for healthcare. I think it's a really big one for everyone. Again, when I was at PlayStation, for example, we and some of you may have heard that at some point in the past, PlayStation got hacked, and so we were super double and triple and quadruple and quintuple really secure or protective of everything that we were doing, to the point where it was becoming really difficult to do anything. But in this case, you're working with PHI data, so it's really important to consider security. And again, I'll show you a little more on that. ROI, so you'll have to figure out, like I said, your cost and productivity. What's the trade-off? What are you? Is this something that you're willing to do? So is the cost and doing that for the enterprise in general and kind of for tax purposes going to outweigh the productivity, or vice versa? It's something to discuss and kind of debate also. And then enablement, data discovery is going to be very important, and so will self-service. And I'll get into all of these in more detail. All right, so security. So the way that I've done it at Providence St. Joseph Health, we basically pulled security into our discussions right away. So we started looking at the cloud providers. And by the way, I think this is a disclaimer. So we have a strategic partnership with Microsoft. But even with Microsoft, we pull them into our reviews, the security, that is, our security team. We wanted to engage them right away. We didn't want them to kind of sit on the sidelines and then we tell them, oh, by the way, we've done this, and then the whole cycle starts again because they need to know what the heck you're doing. So it's actually better, and no offense to any security experts here or teams that run security, but you want to engage your security as soon as possible, just to keep them informed of what you're doing, because again, they will want to know that. Pay attention to HIPAA, PHI, high trust. I can tell you that high trust is important, but what's interesting is that our security, for example, wasn't that interested in high trust. One of our vendors, for instance, had there were questions about high trust, but our security team started reviewing their documentation and realized that they're actually FedRAMP compliant. So they said, okay, you have FedRAMP, that's no problem. So, but they actually did have to have HIPAA. A lot of vendors will tell you whether they're HIPAA compliant or not, and PHI compliant or not. Definitely, pay attention to that. It's important. It's not just to kind of to mollify your security team, but it's important, for you about some of the things that you will be doing with the data. Data encryption in transit and at rest kind of goes without saying, but it's another area within security to focus on. And again, in transit, when you're going from premises, because most likely your systems, whether your EMR systems, whether it's Epic or I don't know, Meditech, Cerner, whatever you have, or maybe some other ones, you will be exchanging data between on-prem and the cloud. So you want to secure those connections for sure. And then when you store the data, this needs to be done at rest as well. And then when talking about something like PHI, for example, and HIPAA, we get into keys and things like that. Again, I can talk more about it later, or ask me in some questions. But you want to enforce some key rotation, for example, if you go into let's say a vendor says that they have their own keys. Well, the question is then, well, do they provide those keys? Do you have any ownership of those keys? Who has access to it? That type of stuff that you have to keep in mind and definitely have to enforce it at some point. There's a vendor that we work with that provides what's called oh my gosh, what is it called? Triple key security. Essentially, what they do is they secure everything with their keys at kind of the first layer. Then the second layer it's kind of a hierarchical thing. The second layer secures the lower layer of keys, and then we put our master key on top of it. And so effectively, they're doing the keying for us, but then we basically have ownership of the data because we have that master key in hand. Okay, so data protections. I just wanted to put it here just in case some of you may not be familiar with what the penalties are for non-compliance with HIPAA or losing your PHI data. It's from HIPAA Journal. So as you can see, there are several tiers here, and the penalties get progressively higher, depending on what you lose, and what kind of breaches you allow. So again, when I got to this field, I actually, full disclosure, I wasn't aware of this, but it's pretty significant. And when we started talking to our vendors, they also said, oh, HIPAA, Schmidt, it's like whatever. But it's actually, they don't understand what that actually is either. We had a number of discussions with different vendors, and really, they said they were HIPAA compliant, but when it came to actually understanding what that is, or they said, oh, don't worry, we're compliant, and if you lose the data, it's what can happen? We're like, well, this can happen, you know. So are you going to be responsible for it? You know, are you going to pay the penalties? And that's another thing that, you know, when you set up your BAAs, for example, you know, the business associate agreements with your vendors and things like that, you need to definitely have that covered in there. And I'm not saying you should push on them to be responsible for it, but you know, definitely make sure that you have a clear ownership of and the responsibilities defined. Okay, so the protections and where to enforce them. So you want to do it again within the data transfers. So when you transfer the data from on-prem to you know to the cloud, you will have to enforce some protections during the transfer. And you can do it in different ways also. You know, you can do it through some obfuscation already, you know, when data is in flight and you're moving it to the cloud. You know, masking, definitely encryption. Again, you know, use for instance, you know, TLS or something to the effect, or you know, a secure you know, VPN connection. Talk to your security team essentially. Data at rest is the next thing that I just talked about, and data masking. Again, you can do it different ways. There's a number of different companies that provide that. What's interesting in our research of securing data, there's no one company that does it comprehensively. You know, you know, different companies will tell you that they do it, but what we found is that you know, it's very interesting. There's the way that you want to secure the data is, it seems that it's not there. There are a couple of startups, and we actually met with Gartner also just to talk to them and see what they can you know, tell us about, you know, because we couldn't find anything ourselves. And finally they said, well, you know, there's, you know, a few startups that are doing this, but you're right, you know, no one does it, you know, as comprehensively as you would like. So you know, so essentially, it's a couple of components that you have to enforce kind of along the way, along the you know, as the data progresses through your workflows or you know, different phases. Data encryption. You know, services access. So people will want access to your services. So again, make sure that you know, you enforce some kind of RBACs or something at least. You know, of course, if you do provide access to data, then you know, you can enforce it at the column level. You can provide it at the, you know, the cell level even. But you know, you will still need those RBACs to be there. And same with data masking, by the way. If you're masking your data, that's great. But again, you need RBACs. Secure provisioning. Again, when you provision, let's say that you work with you know, some ML, and I can't mention the name, but let's say you know, you work with a vendor that runs Spark. I think I can mention that. So you know, you're running Spark, and you know, you need more. You need a bigger cluster. You need to start provisioning more nodes for the cluster. Make sure that again, you figure out a way how to do it securely. You can do it securely for sure, but you want to make sure that it's you know, for example, limited to your own space, your subscription or VNet. You know, for those who are in Azure, for instance, and you know, or AWS or GCP. And you know, and again, you kind of carve it out and do it securely, as opposed to just, you know, opening that up to, you know, to the rest of the internet. It's something that was kind of interesting, and one of our vendors actually told us that, oh, it's all secure, you know, we're HIPAA and, you know, and everything compliant. And then we noticed that that this particular service was actually exposed to the rest of the internet, and we found it completely by accident. So it's kind of interesting. Again, do your own research, I think. Data access to, so I mentioned that already, and then data export. Most likely, you will want to export the results of your models, your queries, whatever you're doing. We have a ton of different extracts that we provide to a lot of different vendors. And how to do it securely, you know, is a question. I mean, you know, we don't laugh. We used to do a lot of SFTP. So you know, when I looked at it, you know, initially, I was like, wow, really? We still do SFTP? And that's how we share data. So there are actually different services that you can use that allow you to share data more securely, and also to know what what your users doing with the data. So you can actually see, you can have logs and audits basically kind of run almost to know what the users are using the data for. On top of it also, you can also establish, there's a service where you can establish your shared, I guess, service agreement with the with your customer, for example, with your partner that you're sharing the data with, and you can tell them basically what you're doing, what they are allowed to do with the data. But again, the onus then is on them to make sure that data is used in the proper way. And all of it is for PHI data. So again, I'm not trying to trivialize in any way. Some of you who have come from the financial industry, will know, there's PII and all of that, but PHI, it's kind of a different animal altogether, it seems. Again, if keep that within the context of the HIPAA violation penalties, for instance, if anything. Okay, so ROI. Time. All right. So ROI. When you start thinking about going to the cloud, when you start thinking about what is this going to give me, what is that return on my investment? Again, as I said earlier, there's a trade-off between how you can spend the money and your productivity. Will your enterprise, will your finance team, for example, support this? It's a different question. But here we actually created a calculator. It's very simple. We created our own calculator of all the different things that we wanted to move to the cloud, but we also worked with one of our vendors to do that as well. They provide a calculator, and it's basically it's a calculator to see all of our use cases. If the use cases can fit into what we're thinking about, and again how they kind of how we what the cost would be in the cloud as well. Compare current and future spend. And again, I'm talking about this within the context of our discussions with finance. There's for sure you're going to have those conversations with your finance team. And again, most likely if you don't do it now, you will in the future, because they will say that you spent a lot more OpEx than you were given, for instance, or you will go to them and ask them for more, because that's they don't like that. List out the productivity gains. Again, they can be either for your CIO or your boss or finance. Again. I keep talking about finance a lot, but I've worked with them a lot, and I want to be sensitive to what they need. And again, it's for us to be successful and all of us to be on the same page and aligned. List out the productivity gains, but some of them may be really abstract to what they what they expect. So, but still, I put them there just to show them how much we can actually do, and also how much we would be able to do as opposed to what we're doing right now. That there's a number of machine learning things that we wanted to do that we were not able to, because again, we were constrained by our scale and our deployments on-prem, and I wanted to show them just in general, what use cases we can actually support once we go into the cloud. Okay, so data discovery is another important thing. So once you go to the cloud, you will need to provide some kind of a data discovery for either your data science team. If you're the scientist, then I guess you will want to use some of this also, and it's really important. So again, it's just so you can increase your productivity, and whether it's you, whether it's other data science teams or data scientists around the enterprise, people don't want to sit there and pore over this data, for hours or days. They want to be able to have some kind of a access to catalog or something. So it's really important to to have that kind of facility. And work with your other teams. Again, I don't know your organizational setup, but most likely either you request it from others, or you basically have that foresight and you go and get it because it's I think it's important. And there's a number, all the tools that you're working with will also most likely interact with the catalog. So it's another kind of plus there. Enable robust data search, lineage, and discovery capabilities. So, for example, in our case, we have we have over 50 hospitals, 800 clinics, and we want to know where this data is coming from. If someone is searching them, searching the data and wants to know, what clinics the data is coming from, some of the metadata or some of the data may already carry that. The metadata may be embedded, but in other ways it may not be. We have a lot of files also, a ton of different files, and we want to know what sources they're coming from, or what's in them. Again, it's important to have some kind of a search and lineage established. Again, there are services and tools that can help you with that. And this is all to avoid data swamp. I mean, it was the same thing with Hadoop in the past. Again, not sure, if you remember or maybe have it. I don't know, but it's definitely something you want to avoid. Keeping track of your data, I think, is important. Consult with your customers also, internal and external. So what do they need? And most likely they will tell you, well, I don't know what's in your data. I don't know what's in your data lake. You give them, and again, I don't know your roles, but if you ask them, well, what do you want? I just gave you access to Tableau, or I gave you access to whatever BI tool. And like, well, it's not enough. We want more. We want to know what's actually there. We want to be able to explore the data. I mean, it's never ending. So talk to them, and definitely ask them what they're looking for, and establish that facility for them to get that. Self-service, kind of an extension of what I just talked about, but it goes beyond that in the sense that if you're querying data, if you allow for querying data, native or direct access to your data stores, people will want that direct access most likely to your backend. It could be for power users, but a lot of times what I found is that it's not just for power users. People just want more data. If they can't self-serve through, let's say, Tableau, again, I'm not endorsing Tableau in any way, just saying that as an example, I don't know, Cognos, OBIE, whatever, MicroStrategy, Click, I don't know. If people don't have enough, they can't access the data through all those different BI tools, they will want more, and so they will ask you for direct access to your data stores, and so you will have to figure out how to do that, and this needs to be simple enough. Not everyone. It's a lot of analysts also. It's not all data science. People may have different titles, but it's not just data science folks that want access. It's a lot of analysts also. They may not be as technical as you, but they still need data to do their jobs and analysis. So data analytics, on the front end, same thing with with just doing having access and self-service, just data. Data sharing. I feel like data sharing is really neglected, and I noticed that at least in healthcare, at my previous companies, we didn't do as much data sharing. When I landed in healthcare, it's incredible how much we actually share the data with others. I mean, we have feeds going in and going out all the time, and again, it's kind of scary in a way. If you can't keep track of those, those transfers, in and out, it's really scary. But also, what's scary to me at least is not being able to keep track of that when some of your other departments or other teams are doing that also on their own, and they will, and they do. And so I think you need to keep track of that to some extent, and need to, again, develop some kind of a secure utility or some facilitated in some way. So you can share this data internally and externally through self-service, but again, securely. Allow ML and AI services self-service also. I think this is important because again, I don't know your setup, but a lot of companies think that they only have one data science team, and that may be true. It's that one official data science team. At the same time, there are different data scientists around the company, or people need access to data, and they would love to do some of this also. Maybe not to the extent that you do that, as a trained data scientist, for instance, but they definitely want access to data. So I think it's important for them to have access. It's important for them to have the ability to experiment and develop their own models or just their own analyses. Okay, so architecture areas to focus on. So ingestion, I'll go through that fairly quickly. Processing, consumption and visualization, and orchestration. Governance, and security. All right, so let's kind of put it all together. So that's the non-scary diagram. So again, it's fairly kind of linear. It goes from ingestion to processing to consumption and visualization. So it's all the cloud services that are kind of doing this for you, just like you would in your on-premises deployments. This is underpinned by some kind of orchestration. So as you're doing the movement of data from ingestion to processing to the data store, for example, and then exposing that for consumption and visualization, you want this run somehow. Whether it's some kind of a scheduler or workflow manager or something. You need that central location, or even if it's for your ops team, it's this one pane of glass to look into everything that you're doing. And then all of that is underpinned by security and governance. So again, I mentioned that here because it's important to have that security mindset, especially in healthcare. Again, trust me, if you're new to this, if you're not, then you know what I'm talking about. With governance, again, it's important, as I mentioned, about doing your data cataloging, for example, data discovery. It's important to have that governance in place to do ingestion, processing, and then consumption and visualization, all of that. Okay, as you go to the cloud, organizational focus changes will most likely ensue. And what I'm talking about is, this is a topic of its own, I think. But I just wanted to mention that because I think we just give a very short shrift to this. So more power will be pushed to the edges. In that sense, your team, for instance, if you do this, if you're responsible for this, central team, this BI team, data warehousing team of your, it's most likely not going to be true anymore. It's going to be really diffuse throughout the company. That's what you want. I mean, ultimately, I think that's what you want. You want to give power to to users of this data. It's that democratization of data that everyone has been talking about for years now. Maybe it never transpired. Who knows? So more power will go to the edges for sure. And with the cloud, you can actually make it happen fairly quickly. Governance and enablement become critical because it will. You will have to enforce policies. You will have to make those policies and enforce them so there's no abuse of your data, and especially since this is going to be so diffuse. That usage and services. Data governance, policy creation, data classification, pattern matching. I mean, all of that goes into whether you're doing MDM or not. All of that will still need to happen, if anything, for the discovery of different data. And then DevOps, something that you can, or well, actually, I would argue that you should do right away also. And it's again talking about self-service, providing those different services through your DevOps team is going to make a huge difference because then all that access that you're pushing to the edges is not going to be haphazard and really kind of random. It's going to go through some kind of an API layer or something similar. that your DevOps team creates for everyone. So what I mean by this this focus changes. So that focus now is going to be slightly different. I'm speaking from from experience that in the past data governance, to some extent, was neglected, I think. And DevOps also didn't have that kind of exposure as they do now. I think now, this is going to change quite a bit. Before it was all infrastructure. So, who do we talk to in infrastructure? We need someone, our man there. We need to know there, someone. But now it's DevOps. It's what can we prioritize to expose next to our users, and then how do we process this this discovery of our data really quickly with our data governance team or tools. So I think these two will be will gain a lot of exposure, and I think it's a kind of a change. All right, so summary. It's just no discoveries here. So the three areas of concern that I was trying to talk about is the security. That's important. And again, I keep talking about this. Enablement through data discovery and self-service, and efficiency and cost when thinking about going to the cloud. And then the organizational focus changes of governance and DevOps. I think that's it.
All right, thank you, Arek. We're going to go straight to questions. If you have one, just raise your hand. You can speak right into the mic here.
So this may be beyond the scope of what you covered, but the news article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about Google's Project Nightingale. Are you familiar with that?
I am not.
Basically, a health system partnered with Google, and they're going to provide cloud services. So the scope of the Wall Street was a little accusatory, is that they didn't tell patients that this is going to happen. So,
So we're not really exposing any data in the cloud to anybody else. I don't know the context of the article. I don't know what was there, and I don't know much about what Google is doing with this data. But definitely, it's one of the the questions that we were getting at the beginning also. Well, what's going to happen with this data? Are you're sharing this with others? Will your patients think that you're basically turning that into another I don't know Facebook data processing mill type of thing? And that's not happening. I mean. Well, I can assure you that's not happening, but you can believe me or not. But I think what we're trying to tell our patients is what we definitely tell our patients is that the data doesn't leave our our space. That's number one. I don't want to say our premises, but two, it's supposed to help them in diagnosis and in their just in our caregiving. To them. So I think it's important to refocus the discussion a little bit. Maybe I'll put it this way. But I'm not sure if that's.
the example with Google says there'll be no commingling with advertising data or advertising efforts, but obviously they want to act on that data from an AI standpoint. So it's not just your section of their servers, it's they will use the data, and again, the argument right now is it's HIPAA compliant because it's shared with partners that are using it for the benefit of the patients, or however that wording is. So,
Are you alluding to our partnership with Microsoft? Is that?
No, I'm just talking about that article. I didn't say
That was advertised also. I think in the Wall Street Journal a few months ago when we signed it. But again, I think and I'll just say what what the article said about us, in our partnership. When we entered into the partnership with Microsoft, it was mainly again to provide kind of the the hospital of the future, and focus more on how AI can in the future benefit our our patients as opposed to commingling it with or actually joining it to to advertising data, for instance.
A question back here.
Thank you very much. I'm very curious about the time horizons involved here. Where did you start? How long did it take to get the first kind of data lake moved over?
Yeah, that's a great question because our timelines were shifting, but for different reasons. First, we actually, before our partnership with Microsoft was announced, we were looking at different cloud providers. So we were doing, we wanted to make sure that we knew, all the different services and what the providers were providing. So, we looked into AWS, GCP, and then into Azure as well. Well, when it was announced that we're going with Azure, then it was kind of a no-brainer. Of course, it was by mandate, and so it took us, I think, maybe a couple of months to actually kind of get our ducks in a row, and get everyone into Azure, or just focused on Azure. But then, honestly, it took us more. So then it was talking to different vendors who are in Azure, for example, or Microsoft themselves about all the security stuff, really. And it took, in one case, I was working with one vendor, and it took us, let's see, 5 months to actually get our agreements in place, working with our legal and and their legal, and it was really difficult to get that to get that going because of the legal agreements. Once we signed that, it was a matter of I think it was actually a week. We got in and we started working. And honestly, I'm not saying that I can claim any productivity, huge productivity yet, but I can see that we're already doing the stuff that it would have taken us a long time on-prem. So we're in the process of migrating a lot of our stuff into the cloud right now. Our data science team is already actually working. So whereas it would have taken them a long time ago before.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, Arek, very good presentation, actually, excellent. We are right now we're in data lake, MapR, Hadoop, and everything. So about 2020, we are moving to cloud, basically. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty much in the same role as data operations and data engineering and operations for United Healthcare. So the question is, how do you manage the change management? I didn't see that, like how do you migrate the code? Use a GitHub, or how do you do that?
I didn't. Otherwise, it would have been a kind of a longer presentation, I guess. But yes, we do use GitHub because we're in Azure. GitHub, by the way, is now owned by Microsoft. I think that's common knowledge. But also we use Azure DevOps. We started using that. Previously, we used Jira for to manage our Scrum teams and things like that, and at our work. But we started using Azure DevOps, and nothing against Jira. It's just it's basically Azure DevOps is covered under our agreement with Microsoft. And also, GitHub is already integrated with it. There are two GitHubs actually. One is one source control system is already part of DevOps. A GitHub you actually have to have to connect to DevOps. And then change management is it's kind of a broader subject also. But one thing I can tell you is that everyone was really looking forward to getting into the cloud because of the promise, I think, where no one query can bring down the entire system, or where our data science team is waiting for another node of R, or something. So it's really we didn't have a problem explaining that to anyone. We didn't have to do much evangelism within. it was really, everyone kind of, I think, bought it right away. And so now it's our turn to make it happen.
We have about 5 minutes left for questions. We're going to do one here. I promise one here. If we have time, we'll come to you. If not, you're going to have them during lunch, okay? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So you talked a lot about, or a little bit about sort of federated data access, getting more people access and your business users. In your context, are you persisting data still locally or on-prem, or are all your data operations, including operational reporting, that sort of thing, is all of that happening in the cloud, or is it primarily used for the AI ML applications, and then on-prem for reporting and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Also, so we are an Epic customer. I think it's okay to say that. And if some of you are Epic customers, also you know about Clarity, you know about Caboodle, and so we do persist it. And Clarity is basically doing it for you to some extent. It basically pulls through Chronicles. It pulls through from your Epic systems, basically. Does the data munging, and then it's available in tables for some kind of queries and consumption. We do have it actually. We recently, last year, we purchased Exadata just to run our Clarity on Exadata to increase their horsepower. But very quickly we realized that it's not enough. And so even that was sagging under the, different queries and the workloads. And so now moving that into the cloud, we can already see that it's going to basically help us a lot. We don't intend to run too much on-prem anymore. We really are going to keep what we have right now. So Clarity is still going to be an Exadata. It's still going to be that data store. But we're moving all of the analytics, all the operational analytics, and all of our ML into the cloud. So we're not cutting off that that access to anyone. People will still have some access, but at the same time, they don't really care about that access if nothing is running, is able to run. So specifically to your question, so yes, we do have Clarity and we have Caboodle, but we're moving those into the cloud as well to allow people to again to scale a little better. So yeah.
So one more. Enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
You answered part of this just a minute ago, I think, and that you said you didn't have to evangelize. Thank you. Too much. But when you were building out your ROI and your business case justifications, did you prioritize by back office or clinical aspects, or what was most attractive when you were building out those justifications?
Yes. So we actually prioritize clinical data sets. And the reason is we have, for lack of a better word, we have pretty vocal customers. And again, because they were not able to run their queries or their workloads anymore on-prem, or they're just were very latent, we prioritize them over other things. It was easier also to get that ROI much faster. And so that's the reason why we worked with them to make sure that they can prioritize things for us, and we move them first.
Great. I think we will do one last question, but if we can do it while we set up the next speaker, we'll be multitasking. So can we have Lin Chen come up to the front? Wonderful. And let's do one last question, and then we'll give another round for Arek.
Hi. On the Clarity side, so do you move incrementally the data from the cloud? So you're still maintaining your Clarity database on-prem, and
Yes.
then every day moving incremental data
Yes.
set to the cloud. So the Chronicles moves to Clarity, and then after that you do another pull from Clarity to the cloud every
Yes.
day. And that was all able to do in that. I mean, get going easily.
Yeah, so
the incremental data loads.
Yes. So are you familiar with the CR-stat alter thing in Clarity? If not, okay,
Yeah, I have heard of that. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, that's really cumbersome,
Yeah.
to put it mildly.
Yeah.
So we actually developed our own tool
Okay.
to do this. I would not want to do it with my own tool. We
Yeah.
actually did that knowing that this is just an interim solution, and we will
Okay.
be moving into a different tool. So we're trying to we're working with a vendor now on a POC to basically do those nightly ingests of all of our data, and we have between 2 to 5 terabytes of data. All those changes.
Yeah.
So we'll do it through CDC and move the deltas only into the cloud.
And there is a vendor that can provide that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are
thing?
several of them.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, okay. And then you were able to sell that solution because you're still maintaining your Clarity data, but you're
Yes.
able to sell that business value for moving into the cloud using the data analytics.
Yeah, absolutely.
piece.
It's
Okay.
we already invested in our Exadata appliance, so it's already there. That's kind of a sunk cost in a way. But again, moving all the analytic workloads into the cloud was that we didn't have to do much selling, but it was the impetus for doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Let's give it up for Arek.
Thank you.